Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Duke Wisdom podcast. Ben McCormick here with Clinton Weaver. We're doing a little bit of a post-mortem podcast today. A tough loss yet again for the Blue Devils, who are now 4-2 on the season after losing by 3 to Kansas, a Kansas team that seems to consistently be able to pull off those one possession wins over Duke, no matter what year it is. That seems to be a pretty constant factor. Clinton, I think you and I were fairly confident about this one after seeing Duke's win over Arizona. But right from the jump, Kansas took an aggressive lead, and it felt like Duke was sort of fighting back all night long, right? It felt like they could never take control of the game. While they took a couple of leads there in the second half, they never felt like they were in control of that game. It felt like if they were going to win it, they were going to have to win it at the buzzer. They were going to have to win, take the lead. Kansas has no chance to take it back. Is a frustrating way to end two games that it feels like Duke could have and maybe even probably should have beat both Kentucky and Kansas. We could be looking at the number one team in the country next week. Instead, we're looking at a team that is still trying to earn its stripes. So definitely a frustrating game, I think, for Duke. Clinton, what were your thoughts on what went down against Kansas?
Well, we definitely stumbled out of the gate again, and you're right, got behind early, big. Fortunately, nobody could see the scoreboard, so they didn't know what the score was because it was ugly. It seemed like Bill Self had a game plan to double team Cooper Flag, and Cooper didn't appear to realize that's what the game plan was. So, too many turnovers, dug ourselves a deep hole early, pushing a rock uphill all night. I think our biggest lead of the game was 2 points. So, yeah, that's a tough way to start, and have that game pressure on you for the entire 40 minutes.
Yeah, it feels like some teams are really just jumping out the gate strong against Duke, right? Like that right from the tip, they're not playing it well. Against Kentucky, yeah, they led at halftime, but I think right out the jump, Kentucky hit like its first 5 3-pointers. And then against Kansas, it felt like they couldn't miss for the first 10 minutes of the game. But then eventually that cools down, but then you're fighting up an uphill battle, and that's not a position you want to put yourself in. And like you mentioned with Cooper, he has proved decidedly so far that he does not handle double teams well at all. I mean, it's a pretty simple process. If you're playing against Duke, double team Cooper Flag because he's going to cough the ball up or he's probably not going to score on that play. Then you're forcing someone else to beat you. Kansas did that at a very high level. They were able to make him cough the ball up. They were able to take him out of the offense for large stretches of the game, and I think they learned that from the Kentucky game. You know, I thought about this a little bit last night with Cooper. I think the difference between this team and some other past Duke teams that have had this strong top 3 pick one and done players, Cooper Flag's not a get out of jail free card. Like Zion Williamson was a little bit of a get out of jail free card. Offense was stagnant. He could just go get a bucket whenever he felt like it. Like Paulo Banchero was that to an extent as well. I don't think Cooper Flag is that guy at all times, or at least he hasn't become it yet. Because he's shown that he can go get buckets at a rapid pace, but he has a very clear weakness, and it's that he doesn't take care of the ball when pressure is put on him by multiple defenders. And that's something that Zion Williamson handled well. That's something that Jaleel Okafor handled well. It's not something he's handled well at all. And the problem for Duke is when Cooper Flag can't put the team up on his back, so far they play so much of their offense through 2 guys, Cooper and Kahn. So if Cooper's not getting it done, you have to start leaning on Kahn Knippel. Kahn Knippel, you couldn't lean on him yesterday. Yeah, he found ways to score. He found ways to be effective. But if he's going to shoot 0 of 8 from 3, that's not a good sign. It is a little bit optimistic maybe from a team perspective that Cooper and Kahn both played very average or even below average games, and Duke was still in a position to win. I think there's something to be said about that, and we'll talk more about that later. But it's tough seeing these freshmen, and Kahn, I'll be remiss if I didn't mention, Cooper turns the ball over within the last minute again in this one, just like he did multiple times against Kentucky. And I'm talking to the TV like, John, you can't put the ball back into Cooper's hands. And he listened, maybe, but he put the ball in Khan's hands, and Khan made a very similar freshman turnover there at the very end of that game. And it's frustrating watching history repeat itself and getting that horrible feeling of deja vu. Clinton, what's your take on how Cooper and Khan played, and what does Duke need to do to avoid making these same young errors?
Well, when anything was working, it was the two-man game with Cooper and Khan, which we saw flashes of that. But Batman needs Robin, right? And Robin went over 8 from 3, like you said. And in the two losses, he's 1 for 16 from 3, and that's definitely not getting it done. To his credit, he had 8 assists, but he also had 3 turnovers. And on that next to last chance to win the game, he drove into a double team, but that double team was caused in part by the fact that Sion James came in from the corner, which and brought his defender with him to allow that double team, which kind of to me begs the question, why was Sion in the game? Well, Sion was in the game because it appears that John had decided to go with him over Caleb Foster. Foster went to the bench with about 14 minutes to go in the game, and he never came back. So that was very interesting to me. That maybe it was a size issue. Maybe we're just trying to match up better against the size of Kansas to put Sion in there. And Sion played well, don't get me wrong, but he also made a mistake on that final play coming in when he should have been hanging out in the corner waiting for that potential 3 ball.
I think that what went into that decision for John is that you see the way the offense was running at the beginning of the game, and it was kind of stagnant. It was just a lot of dribble handoffs around the 3 point arc and not really getting anywhere with the ball. And so I think Caleb Foster had yesterday and has had a sort of difficult time setting up the offense. He can go get his own bucket, and I think that Tyrese Proctor has proved to be a good offensive player uh, off the ball, and we'll talk more about Tyrese later. There's a lot to be talked about there, but for Caleb, he struggled a little bit to set that offense up, and I think he really struggled yesterday because the offense just wasn't very dynamic when he was in the game for the most part. So I think that was a big thing that went into the decision to play Sion James. Sion's not a natural point guard, but I think he was a little more protective of the ball, and they were a little more dynamic with him at the one overall. Now, is that going to be the case going forward? I don't know. I'd like to think that Caleb will come around. Um, but we got to a point yesterday where Caleb Foster really wasn't helping the cause a ton, and so I think that that's what went into that decision for John. What do you think about
Well,
that?
it's true that Foster's plus minus has been worse than Sion's, and Sion had a very efficient game. He was 3 for 3 from the field, 2 for 2 from 3 point range, 2 for 2 from the free throw line. So you can't do much better than that. That's perfect. And yeah, he's very reliable. And I felt like his size was needed in this game. Uh, you make a valid point that uh, the offense was a bit stagnant, especially early on. We kind of looked nervous out of the gate, and just passing the ball around the perimeter is not going to get it done.
Yeah. So next, there's so much to address from this game. I mean, just there was so much dialogue last night on all social media apps, and there are a good mixture of Duke fans, as always. I think after a loss, but there's the mixture of fans who are losing their minds about how bad this team is, and John Shire needs to be on the hot seat. Let me lay that to bed. John Shire does not need to be on the hot seat. They lost by one possession to the number one team in the country. Now, whether that's actually the number one team in the country or not is to be debated, but nonetheless, it's a good team. So, no, Shire's not on the hot seat. And no, this is not a bad basketball team. It's a very good basketball team, but it's a team that's still figuring things out. So I think let's not jump off the cliff, but I kind of want to let's find a middle because there's another extreme that is the everything's going to be just fine. Everyone's overreacting. There's nothing bad came of this. Duke's going to be so much better in March than they are now. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Sure. But I don't think that means that there's nothing negative about this game. While losing this game isn't going to lose, the season for you, it doesn't really matter in terms of that. And yeah, it might help them learn and develop and get better. But there is a net negative to losing this game, and there's a pretty big one. And I touched on it last night on Twitter, and it's that this loss, and we've talked about it multiple times, this loss made a one seed so difficult for Duke to obtain. Because now Duke facing Auburn next week, they have to beat Auburn. Auburn is very likely to be the number one or two team, probably number two team in the country next week. They're walking into Cameron. I think the best team Duke's played all season might be the best team Duke plays, period, all season, because they could be the best team in the country. They're walking into Cameron. You got to win that game if you want a one seed. You can't be 1-3 in these four games because then you're forcing your own hand to have to go like 19-1 or 18-2. 18-2 probably would do it in conference play, and 18-2 is just an unrealistic ask. I don't care how bad the perception of the ACC is. They're not going 18-2. Like that's at least that's really unlikely that they go 18-2, considering the fact that they've already lost two games to begin the year. I would have believed it if they were still undefeated, maybe, but that seems unlikely. So a win over Auburn is now a requirement to get a one seed. And some have pushed back on me saying it's too early to be talking about seeding. I don't think so. Because if you look back at past teams that have been a one seed at Duke, 2010, one loss in non conference. 2011, none. 2015, none. 2019, one. And it's like already you're over the limit. You're over the limit. And those teams had something going for them that this one doesn't. They had good wins available in conference play almost on a nightly basis. This team has a few. They've got Carolina twice, maybe a game at Louisville next weekend could end up being a top 25 game. They just beat the snot out of Indiana. Louisville's actually maybe some solid competition. But this loss makes Duke's life a lot more difficult. And you might say, well, you just want to be the best version of yourself by March. That's true. I'm not saying Duke can't win a national title when they're not a one seed. But history and statistics say that if you're not a one seed, you've got a really, really low chance of cutting down the nets.
Well, so I come down on the side of we probably want to be at least a two seed. One is preferable, obviously. But the path, either way, if seeding holds up, one has to play two to get into the Final Four. So two versus one versus two, doesn't really matter. You have to play who's in front of you. Sometimes brackets break wide open in the tournament. I think about Carolina and St. Peter's that they had to get through the other year in 2022 to make it to the Final Four. So you never know what's going to happen. It's March Madness. So, yeah, they're going to have limited opportunities, maybe 3 games against Carolina, Auburn. I think Louisville will be ranked. They could be highly ranked if they keep winning during this holiday break. And so all the other games like those become more important to seeding. A one could be by the boards already. But I think we'll all just feel a heck of a lot better if we just take care of business against Auburn. That's job one right now.
Yeah, that's definitely the first priority. I think the pessimistic side of my brain is looking at that record they have right now, saying if they beat Seattle this Friday, they're 5-2. They lose to Auburn, they're 5-3. 5-3 sounds very similar because that's the record they had last year after dropping 3 early games. And while last year's season didn't end poorly, it was an Elite Eight. I think I'm getting a little sick of going to the Elite Eight, and so I'm worried. I'm worried that's a pitfall you can fall into. You don't want to give the committee a reason to make you a 4 seed because a 4 seed's life's pretty difficult. That's not a fun spot to be in, and so I still don't doubt that this team could be in a very good position to go to the Final Four, even if they lose to Auburn. But I do have my doubts that once they got there, that they would be the favorite. But it is a very, very young season. So much can change for the worse or for the better. Hopefully for the better. I think for the better. I mean, considering the fact that they've been in their 2 losses have been against very good teams, that they probably should have won those games, but just barely lost them because they just seemingly don't know how to handle close games when it comes down to the wire. One guy that I think maybe should have gotten an opportunity there at the end of the game. And now on that very last play where Khan misses the shot, just barely rolls out. I that play design, there's a lot happening on that. One, I think Tyrese Proctor jumped too early. I think he started his action too early on that play. So it's unclear to me who the play was designed to set up. Um, but it ends up setting up Khan. My hope is that it wasn't intended to set him up and that it was intended to set Tyrese up. Because Tyrese Proctor shooting 5 of 7 from 3, I think there was, once again, a drastic lack of looks for Tyrese. And I would have liked to have seen him with the ball in his hand more. Downhill actions for Proctor would have been nice to see. I mean, he only shot those 7, pretty much those 7 threes. And for him to go 5 of 7 and not have the ball in his hands there at the end of the game, pretty much in any of those sequences, but maybe for a second, I think that's a major failure of closing a game, in my opinion.
Well, we were talking about Batman and Robin with Cooper and Khan, but there's another potential two-man action out there that we've been looking for, which is Proctor and Malawach. And Proctor played 35 minutes. He took 7 shots. Malawach played 24 minutes. He took 2 shots. So it seems like they're not really getting involved enough in the offense, considering the potential there for some really good production. Proctor's shooting 50% from 3 on the year, so maybe he should get a few more opportunities. Actually, all of his shots were from 3 against Kansas, and he made 5 out of 7. So his only negative was his 4 turnovers. But yeah, I think it's certainly worthy of throwing him into the mix at the end of game situations as an option. We got more than one guy who can make a play to win a game. We just haven't succeeded at identifying him yet.
Want to join a community of Duke accounts publishing news, theories, and predictions on Duke athletics? Join the Duke Wisdom Network. Just go to dukewisdom.org/join network today and fill out the form with your name and social media. Or you can DM at Duke_Wisdom on Twitter or Instagram. Become a part of the community of Duke fans publishing their takes today. Again, that's dukewisdom.org/join network to DM at Duke_Wisdom on Twitter or Instagram.
Well, I think Tyrese, he's the most tenured player on the team in terms of time in Durham. He's a team captain. He's right now proven to be the most efficient shooter from 3 and the most efficient scorer as a guard. Not the most high volume, but the most efficient. And so to me, it's like you've got that guy and you're underusing him. And then with Malawach, he's the most efficient player on the team. You've got a top 10 player who can score the ball up, run the ball up, got great touch inside. He doesn't really miss. If you just set him up well, he's likely to finish. And so to me, especially once Hunter Dickinson exits that game and he's in and not Malik, we'll talk about Malik. Malik did very well, so I'm not bashing Malik. But when you've got Malawach in that game, they hit Malawach one time. Put that ball high, man. Let him throw it down. Give him the ball more. Let him try. And to me, I think you touched on something good there. That there's two guys that just seem like they're not as involved. Now, have they proven that they can close a game? No, but they haven't really been given the chance. And so, if they're put into a position again, I think you have to read the room. You have to say, well, who's getting it done today? And I think yesterday that was clearly Tyrese Proctor. And I think that's who they should have gone to in the moment. But I just mentioned Malik Brown. Let's talk about Malik Brown. Malik Brown played pretty solid, pretty fantastic minutes. I did not count. I did not keep track of how many times he got a tip out or knocked the ball away, but it was a lot. It only led to an actual steal a couple times, but that's something that's getting in the head of those Kansas players when he's doing that. He was giving Dickinson an absolute fit on that floor. I think the refs were being way too touchy with the foul calls on Brown. I think there were multiple times that he had a legal box out, and somebody, either Dickinson hooked him or went over the back on him, or somebody else went over the back on him, where Malik was picking up fouls that just were not fouls on him at all. And that was frustrating. I think that was probably the most frustrating part of the officiating, was the way they handled Malik Brown. But Malik played a fantastic game defensively, and he was finally able to get over that 2-point threshold, even hit a three-pointer. I was not expecting him in that moment, especially a big moment in that game, to fire off his first three as a Blue Devil, but he did so, and he nailed it. And so I'm extremely pleased with Malik Brown. I actually wish that Duke could have used him more, whether that's a decision by Shire or it was just a decision by necessity because he got into foul trouble.
He was my player of the game. The one time I yelled at the TV set in a good way was when he hit that 3-pointer. And he was just a pest, a complete pest. It was a beautiful thing to behold. That's the way he plays. And he gave Dickinson the Dickens, you might say. Definitely aggravated the heck out of him, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
Yeah, well, let's talk about Hunter Dickinson, right? Let's talk about that. That's probably a hot button issue. And so Dickinson, to me, he played an okay game. Like, he played all right. I'm not entirely convinced that him leaving that game was a bad thing for Kansas, because I actually think they were a lot more dynamic offensively, kept the ball moving. Like we talked about last episode, that a big thing was trying to keep Kansas's guards under wraps. And so I think that a big reason why Duke lost this game is because they weren't really able to do that. Dickinson only having 11 points at that point, I mean, even if he plays out, he has kind of a slow, churned out 15 points, maybe. And that's fine. Like, you live with that. That's cool. He's going to get his points because he's such a big, tenured, seasoned player. He's gonna score. You're not just going to hold Hunter Dickinson to 4 points. I think Duke did a pretty good job on him, and I think Kansas's offense was just way more dynamic without him on the floor. But I will say that Duke should have made Kansas pay on the other end a lot more, and that goes back to trying to set Malawatch up more. But that's enough talk about the actual gameplay of Hunter Dickinson. Let's talk about, the obvious thing, the elephant in the room. The play that got him ejected, and then subsequently he just sits on the bench for like the next 6 minutes for some odd reason. Like, the officials forgot that an ejection means you have to leave.
Right.
Which, to me, I don't know. I haven't read the entire rule book. To me, that feels like something. It's like, if he doesn't abide by that, should that not be another technical foul?
Exactly what it's supposed to be.
I thought so. And so that was tough to watch that happen. That's just a failure by the officials to keep control of a situation and properly, put the rules forward. And so that was frustrating. To me, on that play with Dickinson, that him getting ejected was not even in my mind. It hadn't even crossed my mind. I'm sitting there thinking, flagrant one or nothing. And I think the reason the officials jumped to the conclusion of flagrant two is simply because of Dickinson's reputation. I think he has a reputation for those plays, very similar to maybe how Grayson Allen did. Like, if Grayson Allen had done that, he probably gets ejected for it. But if just some random guy did it, I don't think they get ejected for that. Like, I think if it was the other way around, if Malik Brown did that to Hunter Dickinson, I don't think he gets tossed. But he did get tossed. And so I think the way they handled that was was poor. If I were an official, I probably would have given a flagrant one to Dickinson and called it a day. But that might be an unpopular take on a Duke podcast. There's probably a lot of people who think that he deserved to get tossed. I think it's difficult to tell intent from that play. I'm not saying that he didn't mean to do it, and if he did, then sure, yeah, that's a flagrant too. But I just think my main problem is once you've called that, they handled it very poorly by allowing him to sit there on the bench until the next timeout.
And they also handled it poorly by calling 4 makeup fouls on Duke in the next 90 seconds. But I agree with you. I was listening to the commentators. They were saying, they're trying to decide, is it a flagrant one or not? And I was saying to myself, it better be a flagrant one. And then they came out with flagrant 2, and I was pleasantly surprised. I'll take it. I kind of agree with you. Didn't seem to really merit that. Yes, he kicked him in the face. It wasn't, some kind of violent, angry kind of kick. So it's kind of hard to judge intent. I think about Christian Laettner and him stepping on the Kentucky player's belly, and he got a regular tech for that, back in the day, which people were complaining he should have been thrown out of the game. And that was probably more egregious because, it was more obvious that he intended to do it. Whereas this one, it was a little unclear. But then to let him sit on the sidelines in violation of the rules, and then, of course, they discovered it, right? Because they asked him to leave. Why not call a technical foul? Do you not know what the rules of the game are? You're referees. There's 3 of you. Surely one of you knows what the rules are. So that pisses me off, and, maybe we're just griping because we lost, but I expect the officials to know the rules.
Yeah, I'm not one to often complain about officiating. I've taken a few instances and a few opportunities to do that. I think this is going to be one of them. I'm not that angry about this like I was maybe at that Virginia play and Kyle Filipowski with his freshman season at the end of the game. That one was one that got me really heated. There's a few moments where I'll get upset about that. I don't usually get or blame refs for losses and calls, and I'm not going to do that this time. Like, Duke did enough to lose this game by themselves. But after that, for them calling those ticky-tacky fouls constantly on Duke was really that was really frustrating because they weren't doing that on both ends. It's one thing if you're going to do that in a game and make it resemble what is a current NBA basketball game, which is just a foul every time down the floor. You can do that, but do it consistently. Don't just go, okay, this guy he can't do this. You can't hand check. But then on the other end, when Cooper Flag dunks through contact of 2 players, that's not a foul. Like that, let's be consistent here. Hand checks, fouls like that, keep it going both ways. I think that you could tell that there's with those officials, they sat there for so long, like deciding things. Every time they went to the monitor, and I would be, especially that one play where it was like an out of bounds call, and it was clearly off of KJ Adams. And I sat there going like, you need one look at this, maybe 2, to decide this. And it took them like 3 minutes to make that call. And I was like, that's insane that it took you that long. It was an extremely easy call to make. But that's my entire rant about the officials. I don't like complaining about officiating, but there were a couple instances where I think it was just a bit striking.
I don't know what the mythology, out there is that Duke gets all the calls. I don't know what happened to that because we sure as heck don't get all the calls. If we ever did, something has gone 180 degrees the other way. It seems like we're getting all the crappy calls. So if you want to put it that way, sure, we're getting all the bad ones. But yeah, it was that game, just like Kentucky, it was a 50-50 game. Could have gone either way. We had our chances at the end. Hunter Dickinson was not the difference maker. Like you said, him being on the bench might have actually helped bring them to life. Dickinson was 4 of 11 from the field, so it's not like he was tearing things up. 2 guys that really seemed to do it to us were KJ Adams and DeJuan Harris, and Adams in particular seemed to have a timely answer every time they needed one.
Man, he picked that day of all days to start making jump shots. I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen KJ Adams hit a jump shot, but I can tell you I've never seen him hit four in the same game. And so that was one of those. Of course, he does that against Duke type moments. It's sort of like the Reggie Johnson game with Miami from 2013, where it's like, who's Reggie Johnson? And then he gives you 30. So that always happens. So that was a little bit upsetting. But you got to account for something like that. But Duke had a guy of their own that did things offensively that maybe he wasn't supposed to do with Malik Brown. And so, kind of on that topic of Malik Brown, I had a note and I told you about it that I've heard, and some of my family was even talking about this last night. Why did John start the second half with the starting lineup again? And so at first I was like, well, he does this every game. And I think this is just what most coaches do. But I think maybe we needed a little more critical analysis. We needed, again, to read the room a little bit more. When you considered that Caleb Foster really hadn't done much, and yeah, maybe you think, okay, I want to get him into a groove. Getting him into a groove would be nice. But sometimes when you're in a close game like that and you've just come off a big run to evaporate a 13-point deficit, maybe you should just be like, go with what worked. Go with what got us here. And what got Duke there was Malik Brown being in the starting lineup and either Sion James or Mason Gillis being in for Caleb Foster. That's what got him there. And so to me, I can't help but think they hit the first, they get the lead there at the beginning of the half, but then they give up like 10 or 11 straight. Now they're down, 8 or 9 points. And to me, I can't help but think if you had started the second half with Malik and Sion, would that run have happened?
That's a legitimate question. I think Coach K did a good job of changing the starting five for the second half, often based on what happened in the first half. I haven't really seen that out of John. Foster did exit the game for good at the 13:56 mark, so he ultimately did make a change, but maybe to your point, it was 6 minutes too late. I wasn't too impressed with Gillis. He really didn't help us out offensively. He was a big body in there on the defensive end, but he was only 2 of 7 from the floor and 1 of 5 from 3. Sion seems more likely to be the answer if it's not going to be Caleb. And making those calls on the fly and mid-game adjustments are important. Could it have been the difference maker? Yeah, it definitely could have. I felt like Malik was definitely outperforming Malawach and deserved the extra minutes, but then he got into foul trouble, and so that changed that calculus. But coming out of the gate, they say, last 4 minutes of the first half, first 4 minutes of the second half, those are critical. And maybe it called for a different lineup to start the second half.
Yeah. A lot to unpack, a lot to unbox from this loss. And look, I don't think anyone should overreact to this. I think there's really no reason to. I think this is a very good team. I think that your panic meter shouldn't be very high, but I think that there should be a little bit of concern. And I think that little bit of concern is rooted in the fact that this team is just playing such a difficult schedule. And it's knowing what's to come. It's knowing that all the opportunities for resume building wins are happening early. And 3 of them have passed Duke by, and they've only seized one of those opportunities. And now the hardest possible game they have is happening, and it's like, I don't know if they're ready for it. And so I don't like feeling that way because I'd like them to be 3-0 or 2-1 right now heading into this Auburn game and just say, okay, give it all you got. What do you have to lose? But might have something to lose in this one. Some people might push back and say it's still so early. It's first week of December. They're not going to lose anything from this. But again, they might, going back to the implications of what it might mean in March. But I think this Auburn game is just massive. I think in the past we've called this is going to be a huge game for Duke. This is going to be a huge game for Duke. We said that Kentucky, Arizona, Kansas. This probably is the biggest week in terms of it will determine the trend and probably the overall seed of Duke in March. This week's massive. They've got Auburn on Wednesday, and even if you beat Auburn, you have a heck of a trap game at Louisville the game after that. This is, like we mentioned, probably a ranked Louisville team next week. That is a massive trap game if you beat Auburn. And then if you beat Auburn, heck, now you got to go into Louisville and, like, you just cannot lose that game then. Like, that is you cannot go into next week and drop both. That would be catastrophic for their record and their seeding, but I doubt that happens. But you don't like being able to be in these positions. So that's where the concern comes from. You like to get your work done ahead of time so you don't have to worry about what's right in front of you too much. But they've got a little bit of they got to have some urgency, I think, next week. There's no doubt about that. What do you expect to see from Duke? How do you think they're going to bounce back?
Well, the psychology of losing is you're highly motivated to change things and win the next one. And, you can come out basically one of two ways in any game. You can come out scared or you can come out angry. I expect them to come out angry and determined, and they're going to be at home. I like us. Bruce Pearl is no Bill Self. I'm not too worried about his game planning compared to what Bill cooked up. So, I think everything aligns for a Duke W as far as I'm concerned. Yes, worst case scenario, we lose both of those and then we're really in the toilet. But I don't expect that to happen. The pure psychology of really any sport is that when you lose, the coach has got your attention in a way that he doesn't otherwise have it. And they're going to get in a little workout against Seattle on Friday to stay sharp. And then I expect them to win. I am cautiously optimistic.
So Auburn has 3 massive wins already this season. They beat Houston, Iowa State, and Carolina last night. That win against Carolina doesn't surprise me at all. I will say I was a little disappointed to wake up and find out that Carolina had erased a 21-point deficit to Dayton the other day, and that was unfortunate because, and especially so in retrospect, because we could have got a Carolina UConn game for like last place in the Maui Invitational, and that would have been really funny. But we didn't get that. We still could, UConn's in that game still, but which serves Dan Hurley, right? But when you look at this Auburn team, they've looked really good. They didn't look great in the first half against Iowa State, but then they turned it around. And the big thing for Duke is Janai Broome. And frankly, I think that Duke has done a pretty good job as a defense on interior players. I think they did a good job on Dickinson. I think they did a good job on Andrew Carr for whatever that means against Kentucky. He's not exactly high level, but he's solid. Janai Broome's a completely different monster. Like I think he's better than Hunter Dickinson. I don't think it's that close. He put up 23 and 19 on Carolina. Now keep in mind Carolina's front court is its entire problem. Carolina's front court was bad enough to get down to 21 to Dayton, and their back court is good enough to erase that deficit. So Carolina's built in a completely different manner than Duke is as a team. They've just got 3 guards that do everything. But so I think Duke is better suited to guard Janai Broome. I don't expect him to go insane, but I expect him to still put up strong numbers. So really it comes down to a very similar thing that I think it came down to against Kansas. Contain those role players, man. Don't let them beat you. Make Janai Broome beat you. And if he does, he does. I don't think he will. But you can't let Miles Kelly, get that 15 points like he did against Carolina while 6 players on the total team scoring double figures. Like you've got to have a balanced attack defensively and pick your battles. I think against Auburn, both teams are solid defensive teams, at least on paper. So I think it should be a very good game, and it's a great game for the crazies to really turn out and vintage Cameron for this one. We have been facing hostile environments. Let's make the top 5 team we're playing actually face a hostile environment ourselves. I think that would be a nice change.
It's been interesting that both Duke and Carolina have played Kansas. Now, after this one, we will have both played Auburn. Game 1, we both lost to Kansas by 3, I believe. And UNC just lost by 13. Definitely don't want to follow suit on that one. And the fact that it's in Cameron should make a world of difference.
Yeah, let's break from tradition. Let's not be like our rival down the road for this one. Let's break from that. Because so far there's been only a slight dividing factor between Duke and Carolina, between who I would actually say is better. Let's put that to rest on Wednesday, and I think Duke definitely has the opportunity to do so. I know it's no fun to lose a game by 1 possession like Duke did, and especially in such a similar way that they did with their first loss. But the sky's not falling. There's still opportunity. The road got a little bit tougher because of this loss, but that doesn't mean that we need to throw in the towel. This team is still young, still developing. They're scratching the surface of potential, and they are still that close to knocking off some of the country's best. So that is a good way of looking at things if you want to be an optimist. I think that they are just now sort of chipping away at what they can be in a few months. And so that's exciting. Overall, though, tough loss. Let's move on. And we will discuss next week's games further on the next episode. And we'll be talking that Seattle game as well. I think we threw that game a little bit into the background. That is happening still. They are playing Seattle, and I really hope that Seattle doesn't clock in. I expect Duke to win that one big, though. As always, thank you guys for listening. Make sure to follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. Go follow Duke Wisdom on Instagram and Twitter and on Blue Sky, and we will talk to you guys later.